In the world of Idor, monsters are not born in forests. They are grown. And that is precisely why all wealthy families, guilds, and crowns fight not for land but for soil in which a monster stronger than an army can be grown. By the time Lin Morrow turned 17, he was already nobody. An orphan from a remote village, whom even the local tax collectors expected nothing from. He dreamed of becoming a farmer, growing ordinary wheat and living quietly. But in Idor, only those without ambition live quietly, and Lin had none at all, only hunger, exhaustion, and a stubborn habit of not dying. Everything changed on the day he found a strange seed in a rift beneath an old field. It looked like a black droplet with a silver vein, as though someone had carved a tiny grain from the night. When Lin touched it, the seed dug into his palm and dissolved into his skin. The pain was so intense that he collapsed to his knees, and a single window flashed before his eyes. Abyss Nursery activated. A second one appeared immediately afterward. Plant monsters. Grow forms. Harvest crops. Lin did not understand a single word, until the first sprout emerged from the ground, right at his feet, and a tiny horned beast the size of a fist crawled out of the sprout, with the eyes of a predator and teeth like scissors. It squeaked, looked at Lin, and bowed. Lin recoiled so sharply that he fell into the mud. The beast also flinched, then stared at him again as though checking whether he was even alive. "What are you?" Lin breathed. The beast did not answer, of course, but another message flashed in Lin's mind. Sapling number 1. Lightning Hound. Stage. Sprout. Nutrition. Mana, meat, water, enemy fear. "I've lost my mind," he muttered. But when he tried to pull his hand away, the beast suddenly licked his palm and obediently sat beside him. At that very moment, another sprout rose from the ground. Then another, and another. Lin realized that this was not a hallucination. It was a tool, or a curse, or God knew what else. He brought the beasts home, hiding them in the old chicken coop. By morning, one of the sprouts had already transformed into a tiny fanged wolf with sparks along its back, the second into a ball of moss with eyes, and the third into a slender serpentine creature whose scales reflected the lamplight. When Lin added a drop of water and the remains of stewed meat to the soil, the window appeared again. Growth acceleration plus 30%. Obedience retention, 100%. New soil type available. Magical garden bed. Lin sat on the floor, stared at the miracle, and understood only one thing. He would no longer be nobody. Because if he could grow monsters the way a farmer grew cabbage, the world would learn his name very quickly. 3 days later, Lin had already conducted his first experimental cultivation. A monstrous-type seed planted in the ground in the backyard produced a sprout after 12 hours. Another day later, a hard, scaly creature resembling a cross between a mole and a lizard emerged from it. When he gave it rabbit blood, the beast doubled in size and gained the ability to sense metal underground. The system window recorded Pet number 2, Underground Bloodhound. Skill, locating ore, hidden objects, living bodies. Lin blinked. "So you can replace miners for me too?" The bloodhound happily wagged its tail. That was how Lin understood the most important thing. His monsters were not merely combat creatures. Each of them possessed a practical function. One could find water, another could scare away predators, a third could purify the soil, a fourth produced fertilizer, while a fifth protected the farm from thieves. And then Lin learned that the system could crossbreed species. When he planted the Lightning Hound and the Underground Bloodhound beside each other, the system displayed compatibility confirmed. New hybrid, Storm Burrower. This was no longer merely a beast. It was a commercial breakthrough, because in the world of Idor, wealthy farms spent decades raising ordinary helper monsters. But in just a few days, Lin had managed to create a creature that could locate minerals, protect territory, and dig tunnels faster than a shovel. He looked at the fully grown hybrid and felt a scheme beginning to take shape in his mind, one that would make any merchant's brain explode. Do not sell monsters, sell solutions. The first customers did not come because of Lin. They came because of the rumors. People in the village quickly began whispering that something strange was happening on the orphan's abandoned field. The ground there never dried out. Animals did not come close, and growling could be heard at night. The village elder sent a collector to him to check whether the boy was practicing forbidden magic. Lin met him with his best monster at the time, a young dark fox, whose fur absorbed light. The collector looked at the beast and immediately tensed. "Is that a dangerous type?" "It is a pet," Lin replied calmly. "A pet? But that is a monster. So, according to you, a cow is not livestock but a sacred animal?" The collector could not think of an answer. Then Lin showed him 3 of his helper monsters: the Storm Burrower, the Soil Healer, which restored depleted land, and the Ashen Guardian, a beast capable of burning pests without harming the crops. The collector watched them for a long time and very cautiously. "And what do you want for this?" Lin pretended to be naive, to buy the neighboring field. In reality, he did not want the field. He wanted infrastructure. But to obtain it, he had to start small. The deal was completed, and the very next day, Lin sold one of his grown beasts for the first time. A small helper beast was sold for an amount that was enormous to him. Then a second buyer came, then a third. People bought monsters not for war but for work. Finding water in arid lands, scaring away rodents, guarding herds, purifying magical filth, fertilizing soil, illuminating farms at night with glowing wings. And suddenly Lin understood. What he held in his hands was not a strange ability. He held a new market. The hardest part was not growing the first monster. The hardest part was making the process sustainable. The Abyss nursery system required 3 things: nutritious soil, a growth resource, and an emotional response from the environment. Lin quickly discovered that fear, joy, hunting, and even excitement accelerated monster development. This meant that his farm had to live not like an ordinary field, but like an ecosystem. He divided the plot into zones: a nursery for eggs and seeds, a dark garden bed for aggressive species, a damp zone for aquatic creatures, a rocky slope for armored forms, and an experimental greenhouse where he placed rare seeds. The soil changed beneath each type. To strengthen the earth, he used the bones of small monsters, magical ash, and special compost made from fragments of ore crystals. This made the ground denser, saturated it with mana, and accelerated the maturation of the beasts. During the first weeks, he barely slept, but the result was worth everything. From an ordinary garden bed were born the Battering Fang, a monster for breaking through fortifications; the Forest Guardian Bee, which pollinated plants and stung intruders; the Moss Cat, which purified toxic water; the Bone Courier, which delivered letters through the forest; and the Trap Flower, which could shoot paralyzing sap. Lin sold some of these creations, kept some for himself, and concealed the rarest bloodlines. Because now he understood one more thing. If the whole world learned that he could grow monsters like crops, they would either want to buy him or kill him. And Lin had no intention of becoming anyone's property. When the farm began generating money, other forces appeared nearby as well. At first, they were petty thieves. Then tribute collectors. Then people from the local magical guild arrived, displeased that some village boy was trading rare monsters without a license. But the last to arrive were bandits. Their leader, a fat mage with a skull tattoo, stopped his carriage at the farm gates and did not even pretend that he wanted to talk. "I heard you're growing some game here," he said. "Growing some. Now it will belong to us." Lin stood at the gates in a work apron, covered in dirt. Behind him, monsters were already stirring in the shadows of the greenhouse. "And if I say no?" he asked. The bandit laughed. "Then I will take the land, you and everything you have grown." He waved his hand, and 3 mercenaries moved forward. Lin exhaled. Then he opened the garden bed. From it, as though from an enormous bud, a beast slowly rose that should not have existed at the first stage. It resembled a lion woven from roots, moss, and metallic veins. Its eyes were like burning coals. The system displayed Legendary Sprout, Root Lion. The bandit turned pale. "What the hell is that?" Lin smiled. "My harvest. The root line lunged forward so quickly that the mercenaries did not even have time to scream. One was thrown aside, the second was entangled by roots, and the third tried to strike with magic, but the beast simply absorbed the spell into its root system and grew even larger. The leader began to retreat. Lin did not pursue him. He simply placed a sign at the entrance. No unauthorized entry. Do not steal the monsters. From that day onward, the rumors about the farm stopped being amusing and began becoming dangerous. Realizing that the village was too small for his business, Lin traveled to the nearest trading city, Larchen, where magical markets, guild warehouses, and auction houses were located. There, he presented his products to major buyers for the first time. They expected ordinary combat pets. Instead, they received beasts that cleaned stalls by themselves, monsters that grew rare herbs, creatures that located paths to underground crystal veins, protective creatures that could be bound to houses, and extremely expensive custom-made hybrids. The market exploded. At first, people thought Lin was merely a talented trainer, then that he had discovered an ancient farming school, then that he was reselling contraband. But when he grew a new hybrid from 3 different sprouts overnight before the eyes of the masters, all questions ended. The problem lay elsewhere. The auctioneers wanted exclusivity, the guilds wanted supply contracts, the aristocrats wanted a personal monopoly, the military wanted combat monsters. Lin encountered genuine business hell for the first time. Everyone wanted to buy him completely. At that very moment, he understood that simple trade would not save him. He needed a company. He needed a brand. He needed a system that could not be taken away with a single strike. That was how his future brand was born. Morrow's Living Crops. Lin hired accountants, former caravanners, 2 exiled alchemists, and 1 extremely angry but brilliant young breeder named Torin. Together, they transformed the farm into a structure, a basic market for helper monsters, a premium line of combat pets, rare seasonal hybrids, healing and purification species, custom contract cultivation. The main innovation was that Lin did not sell monsters forever, but the right to grow them. The buyer received a seed, instructions, and a level restriction. If they wanted real power, they had to pay for the next stage. It proved to be brilliant, because the monsters increased in value together with the customers. Caravanners took beasts for protection, landowners for their fields, guilds for fights, mages for experiments, aristocrats to show off. Lin, meanwhile, turned every sale into future dependence on him. He sold the starting point, then an upgrade, then a hybrid, then a rare soil type, then a seasonal contract, and all of it not at a loss but with rising profits. Soon, the farm had a warehouse, greenhouses, incubators, training enclosures, and its own guard force made up of grown beasts. No one called him a farmer seriously anymore. Now he was a monster farmer, and it sounded frighteningly profitable. One day, a messenger bearing the royal seal arrived at the farm. The crown learned about Lin later than everyone else, but now it could no longer ignore him. The letter contained an official order. The palace wanted a batch of rare beasts to protect the southern borders from mist creatures that had begun seeping out of the old ruins. The order was enormous. The payment was even greater. But Lin immediately understood. This was not merely trade. It was a test. If he agreed, the crown would begin controlling him. If he refused, he would be declared a threat. He agreed. But he set his own condition. "I will grow what you need," he told the messenger. "But you will not receive exclusive rights. My brand will remain independent." The messenger wanted to object, but he saw the root line slowly emerging from the shadows behind Lin, and changed his mind. For the royal order, Lin assembled a new line: field guardians for fortifications, mist hawks for reconnaissance, beacon hounds that glowed at night, stone scales for the front line, and a new experimental type, the Garden Executioner. This beast was created not for combat, but for holding a defensive line. It grew from the ground like a tree and became a moving fortress capable of covering an entire section of wall. The palace was shocked, and Lin received his first public recognition and, more importantly, his first genuine political influence. As soon as the royal order made the farm famous, those who decided that it would be easier to take than to buy appeared. First, spies. Then rival alchemists. Then fake customers who attempted to steal the seeds. And then came the Order of Tamed Blood, a secret organization that believed monsters should not be grown on farms. According to their faith, a creature had to be born through pain and blood. Otherwise, it was wrong. Their leader, a tall man in a red robe, gave Lin an ultimatum. You are perverting the natural order. Surrender the source or die. Lin looked at him calmly. Growing a monster is not a perversion. It is a craft. You think this is a craft? Yes, then show me. Lin smiled and threw open the greenhouse doors. A new line of beasts emerged from inside, neither combat nor domestic, but economic. They produced special mana, accelerated the growth of nearby plants, restored the soil, and could strengthen the food supply for other monsters tenfold. The order froze, because it understood something terrifying. Lin was not merely growing combat pets, he was creating an entire agricultural empire in which even war would depend on his harvest. A year after opening the farm, Lin was already managing several business sectors simultaneously. His enterprise included a combat monster market, the breeding of agricultural hybrids, the purification of contaminated lands, the construction of protective nurseries for villages, the export of rare seeds, and the licensing of breeds to guilds. But his greatest secret was not selling monsters. The greatest secret was that monsters grown in his soil remained connected to him, even after being sold. Not as slaves, as living networks. Any sold beast could be recalled in a critical moment through a special magical resonance. Any hybrid could transmit information about its surroundings to Lin. Any farm where he installed his soil began operating as part of his expanding system. In other words, his business was not merely profitable, it was self-replicating. And by the time his competitors understood this, it was already too late. Lin became not a farmer, but the center of an ecosystem around which money, land, security, and politics revolved. To prove that his system worked not only on fertile soil, Lin traveled to the Greystone Wasteland, a scorched territory where nothing had grown for decades. There, people were dying because the land was depleted, while monsters were born only sick and vicious. He came there without an army, only with seeds. The local residents looked at him as though he were insane. Nothing lives on this land, they told him. Then we will fix it, Lin replied. He started small, improved the soil with compost, released moss purifiers, installed drainage, added mineralized bones, and planted 3 special seeds created through hybridization. A week later, the first grass broke through the dry crust. After 2 weeks, insects appeared. After 3, small animals. After a month, a fully developed growth zone. And then, for the first time, the system showed Lin a page he had never seen before. Ecosystem expansion available. New level. Living biome. Lin looked at the green strip in the heart of the wasteland and understood. His business was no longer limited to sales. He could restore the world. When the monster farmer's empire reached its peak, Lin discovered an unexpected truth. The abyss seed that had given him his power was not an accidental gift. It was part of an ancient project, an attempt to create not merely beasts, but an environment in which monsters and humans could grow together. Long ago, this project had been destroyed because it deprived the elites of control. If everyone could grow monsters, the monopoly on power would collapse. That was precisely why the old clans wanted to kill Lin. That was precisely why the crown wanted to subjugate him. That was precisely why the orders feared his soil more than swords. Because Lin was not selling monsters. He was selling the freedom to grow one's own power. In the final scene of this arc, he stood atop his main greenhouse, looking at dozens of nurseries, at the market that had become a city, and at the thousands of monsters his business had grown across the continent. Beside him sat the root lion, no longer merely a beast, but a symbol of his entire empire. Lin smiled. Once I only wanted to become a farmer. The ground beneath him glowed softly, and now it seems I am growing an entire world. Lin first realized that his business had grown too quickly on the day when neither thieves nor bandits but troops stopped at the gates of his main greenhouse. Not royal, not city troops. Private. The soldier's armor bore the symbol of a rival agricultural conglomerate, the company Verde's Crown, the oldest supplier of magical seeds, combat pets, and agricultural rituals on the eastern coast. Its head, Lord Aster Verde, stepped forward in a white cloak, as though he had arrived not for a forceful raid but for a business meeting. "Lynn Morrow," he said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Your activities are disrupting the market. You grow rare beasts without a license, create your own bloodlines, and sell them more cheaply than is permitted." Lynn stood on the greenhouse porch with mud on his boots and a moss monster at his feet. "So you have come to arrest me?" Aster smiled. "We have come to eliminate the problem." The soldiers deployed suppression rods. At a signal, their mages began spreading a field of fire around Lynn's fields. They planned to burn the crops, destroy the nurseries, and frighten away his customers. But they made one mistake. They had come onto land that Lynn already considered part of his system. He raised his hand. Roots stirred beneath the soil. Then dozens of tiny guardians crawled out, followed by a swarm of glowing bees, then stone puppies with thick paws, then root snakes. And behind them, the root lion itself, which had already grown to the size of a captain-level combat beast. For the first time, Aster stopped smiling. "What the—" Lynn exhaled and said quietly, "You came to burn down a farm, but this is no longer a farm. This is my home." And then the entire line of fire they had raised drowned in a living green network. Verde's Crown did not surrender after the failure. On the contrary, they declared Lynn a threat to market stability. This meant one thing. Now, not only soldiers, but economic mechanisms would be used against him. There began bans on transporting his seeds, pressure on auction houses, false accusations of selling impure monsters, attempts to lure away his suppliers, and covert sabotage of soil in other regions to cause chaos and blame it on Lynn. But Lynn no longer had only one farm. In a year, he had built a network of small nurseries and experimental plots connected through a system of route logistics. This was not merely a business, but an agricultural web. If one node was severed somewhere, the others began compensating for the losses. That was why when his main warehouse in Larchen burned down, the customers received replacements the very next day. When one city declared his monsters dangerous, another city demonstrated increased crop yields thanks to his soil purifiers. When the guild attempted to freeze his licenses, villages working with his beasts submitted collective petitions. Lynn became something they do not write about in trade textbooks. He became indispensable. Against the backdrop of this chaos, Ira Shane appeared in his life, a former auction appraiser who had been dismissed for valuing magical artifacts and pets too honestly. She came to Lynn herself, carrying a folder of documents and wearing the expression of someone who had long stopped believing in knights but still believed in functioning models. "You do not understand your market," she said, instead of greeting him. "You sell monsters as goods. That is a mistake." Lynn raised an eyebrow slightly. "Then how should I do it? As assets, as infrastructure, as ecosystem investments. Your beasts are not merely pets. They generate recurring profits if the buyer is smart. You should sell not a beast, but a chain of growth." Lynn looked at her for a couple of seconds, then slowly smiled. "Are you staying?" Ira placed the folder on the table. "If you give me a share and stop negotiating with aristocrats yourself. You are too honest for the political arena, and you are too smart for a village. That is why I am here." That was how a person appeared in his story who transformed a chaotic miracle business into a genuine corporation. Until that moment, Lynn had worked with forest, soil, aquatic, and combat species. But after the Verde's Crown attack, he realized that he needed not merely a new monster, but a symbol of power. And the system responded. In one of the old rifts beneath the Greystone Wasteland, Lynn found a charred nest and the remains of ancient scales. The system identified the material as a fragment of the dragon class. When he planted it in nutritious soil, the ground exploded with golden light. A sprout as thick as an arm emerged from it. Then the bench cracked. Then the floor trembled. Then a tiny dragon with wings the size of leaves crawled out of the soil. Seedling dragon, that was what the system called it. Lynn did not believe it. until the little dragon ate 3 pieces of stone fertilizer, doubled in size, and released its first burst of flame, which did not burn the plants but stimulated their growth. It was a world-level discovery. Lin had not obtained a combat dragon, he had obtained a dragon greenhouse line. After that, his farms began producing fire dragons for protection, green pollinator dragons, stone dragons for mines, and the rarest line, the heart scale, whose breath accelerated the growth of any living plants in the area. Upon seeing this, Era silently sat down. "Do you understand that you have just created an entirely separate industry?" "I think so." "No," she said. "You have created a new standard." When the enemies understood that Lin could not be broken through ordinary pressure, they resorted to dirty methods. One of the rival houses hired by Verdi's crown planted infected seeds on his lands. They were parasitic plants capable of draining mana from the ground and turning the soil into a dead crust. The problem was that it worked. Withering began on 2 plots. 3 greenhouses began losing resources. 1 batch of beasts fell ill. For the first time in a long while, Lin was genuinely angry. He summoned Ira, Toran, and the Root Lion to a council directly in the middle of the infected zone. "We are not simply going to clean this up," he said. "Then what?" Ira asked. Lin looked at the parasite's slimy black roots. "We will tame them." Toran swore. "Is that even possible? If something living wants to devour my land, I will turn it into fertilizer." And then he created a new line, the parasitic garden. He did not merely destroy the infection. He fed the parasites magical filth, strengthened them, stabilized them, and directed them into a service form. These creatures began extracting poison, absorbing harmful mana, converting it into nutrients, and restoring growth to the other plants. Lin transformed an enemy into infrastructure. That was the moment when even Era said, "You really are a sick genius." The next blow against him came from the capital. There, in the central auction district, Verdi's crown gathered its allies and announced an open tender for future technologies of beast cultivation. In essence, it was an attempt to crush Lin not with a sword but with reputation, to arrange a public comparison between his products and those of the elite. Lin came personally. At the entrance, he was met by dozens of arrogant merchants, artifact makers, and mage breeders. They looked at him like an upstart from the dirt, but he had not come to argue. He had come to win. Samples were brought onto the stage. The best defensive beast of a noble house from the capital, an elite fertility spirit, a standardized combat pet of the crown. Then Lin presented his own. First, an ordinary-looking sprout. Then a second. Then a third. And then he demonstrated that every seed in his system did not merely grow, but develop depending on the customer's conditions. For an army into a fighter, for a farm into a helper, for a city into a defender, for a mine into a scout, for a wasteland into a restorer. It was not a product. It was an adaptive platform. And then Lin revealed his final card, the Harvest Monarch. An enormous creature resembling an ancient tree and a beast at the same time grew from beneath the stage. Its branches ended in claws, its roots moved like tentacles, and crystalline buds bloomed on its back. It did not roar, it announced itself. And the auction hall understood. Lin was not merely catching up with the market, he was rewriting it. After the scandal, the Capital Council was forced to offer Lin an official contract. The city wanted his technologies to restore poor districts, contaminated neighborhoods, and suburban farms. It was too profitable to refuse. But Era warned him, "If you agree without conditions, they will put you on a chain." Lin smirked. "Then I simply will not sign the chain." He put forward his demands: the independence of his brand, the right to use his own cultivation methods, separate licenses for non-standard forms, and a ban on confiscating seeds without his consent. The council was seething, but after the demonstration of the Harvest Monarch and the reports on the restoration of the Greystone Wasteland, they had no choice. The contract was signed. And on that very day, Lin finally transformed from a village oddball into a player of national importance. But the higher he rose, the more dangerous the night became. One day, it was not people who came to the farm. Entities came. Twisted beasts infected with foreign magic emerged from the fog. They did not belong to any house. They were following the trail of the seeds. Someone wanted not to steal the harvest, but to take the source. Lin entered the clearing first. The root line followed him. Then the seedling dragon. Then the parasitic garden, now already part of the defenses. Then the new guardian lines, but at the center of the invasion, he saw something he had not expected. The old abyss seed that had once given him power began reacting to the attackers. The system flashed with a new window. Resonance with the original source detected. Layer activated. Mother bed. Lin froze. Mother? What? And the ground beneath him opened. An ancient structure rose from the depths of the farm, not merely a root system, but an enormous magical matrix embedded in the very foundation of Lin's power. It was older than all his current greenhouses, older than the market, older than the farm, older than the brand itself. It was the original node from which not only pet monsters, but entire biological lines could grow. That was precisely why his seeds worked so unusually. They did not grow monsters, they reproduced the possibility of a monster. Lin stood amid this power and finally understood that his gift was not a unique accident, but the legacy of an ancient system intended to create living ecosystems of combat species. The attacking entities retreated when a new beast rose from the mother bed. It looked like an enormous heron intertwined with grapevines and bone spikes. The system named it Archdomain Guardian. With a single sweep of its wing, the creature cleared the fog, and the infected beast began crumbling into nutritious dust. Lin looked at the Guardian and understood. Now he had not only a business and an army, but also the heart of the system. After the night raid, the farm could no longer be called a private enterprise. It had become an economic power, a strategic facility, an agricultural laboratory, a monster cultivation center, and a point around which the kingdom, guilds, and competitors began to revolve. Verda's crown retreated but did not disappear. The crown sent observers. The guilds began imitating him. The black market raised its prices. And Lin, standing on his greenhouse beside Era, looked at the fields where new seeds were already growing. "What comes next?" she asked. Lin smiled as he looked over his lands. "Next, I will learn to grow more than beasts." He turned toward the map of new rifts, the lists of orders and the reports about marine and underground zones that had yet to be developed. "Next, I will grow an empire." Lin thought he had already seen everything until one day a ship without a flag docked at his farm. Not a merchant ship, not a royal one, not a pirate ship. Neutral, but so expensive that its very appearance said it was backed by people accustomed to buying things that others were not even shown. A woman in a blue cloak with damp strands of hair and a metal badge of the Maritime Chamber stepped off the ship. Her name was Captain Celia Rain. She did not smile, bargain, or waste time on pleasantries. "We need monsters for ocean routes," she said immediately. "Not combat ones, working ones. Those capable of guiding ships through living storms, finding underwater rifts, and protecting caravans from creatures of the depths." Lin looked at her and understood that this was no longer merely a new order. It was a door into a new industry. "You have the sea," he said, "and I have seeds." She raised an eyebrow. "Seeds?" Lin merely smiled, and that very evening, for the first time, he planted a special set in salty soil. An algae core, a crystalline bone, and a charred scale from an old rift. The system reacted almost instantly. Marine bed unlocked. New biome, saline womb. A thin blue sprout rose from the water in the greenhouse pool, followed by a spiral of shells and then a small beast with fins and glowing whiskers. It looked like a cat that the sea had decided to make its own. The system named it Tidal Catarus. Celia silently stared at it and then, for the first time in Lin's life, swore in shock. "It senses currents?" Lin checked. "Yes." This tiny marine pet not only sensed currents, it could predict changes in water flows and find safe paths through underwater storms. Celia exhaled slowly. If you create 10,000 of these, you will collapse the navigation market. Lynn looked at her honestly. I do not mind. The marine line grew so quickly that within a week, Lynn could no longer keep up with all the experiments. The water in the special pools changed every few hours, and the new species seemed to be drawn to him on their own. From the marine bed emerged tidal cattresses for navigation, deep water needles small but deadly beasts for protecting boats, bubble rays that purified water, storm sea serpents that functioned as living beacons, and one very strange species, the reef dragonling, which released a stone framework into the water as it grew, accelerating coral growth and creating artificial underwater barriers. Celia watched all of this as though a new civilization were being born before her eyes. You are not a farmer, she said. You are a bioengineer, only without a proper education. I am a farmer, Lynn objected. I just have very strange crops. She laughed. It was the first time he saw someone who had come for business begin to believe in him as a force of the world. That was precisely why the marine line became his next major direction. He began selling navigation monsters for the fleet, protective beasts for ports, coral modules for reef restoration, living filters for harbor purification, and special pets for hunting deep-sea parasites. Within a month, several coastal cities already depended on his products. But as soon as Lynn entered the ocean market, a new enemy appeared. House Brainholt. It was an old family of marine artifact makers and shipyard owners who had controlled navigation systems, port monsters, and caravan insurance for decades. They had money, connections, and a very bad habit of destroying other people's industries whenever someone threatened their monopoly. Their heir, Alvin Brainholt, arrived before Lynn accompanied by 3 lawyers, 2 bodyguards, and 1 ornate scroll covered in seals. You are illegally selling marine forms, he announced. You have no right to operate in the oceanic biosector. Lynn did not even blink. And you have the right to a monopoly? We have a license. I have results. Alvin narrowed his eyes. Do you understand that you are playing against houses that control supplies to 5 ports? Lynn nodded. I understand. That is why I have no intention of playing by your rules. Alvin left with a smile that promised trouble. And a week later it began. Lynn's suppliers began being detained. Ship inspections suddenly became frequent. Some orders disappeared. Rumors appeared that his marine monsters were unstable. It was a declaration of war. Lynn did not respond immediately. He did what he did best. He grew a solution. He traveled to an old shipyard where the ruined docks had stood empty for several years because of an invasion of mutated deep-sea creatures. The place was considered cursed too much salt, too little mana, and water that was too aggressive. Perfect. He planted the marine line in the soil, added purified ore, coral dust, and the blood of a storm ray. Several hours later, the water around the pier began to glow. Then the first new species rose from beneath the waves, the shipyard shell titan. It was an enormous creature, almost like a living pier, capable of strengthening piles, repairing hulls, holding ships in place during storms, and driving away marine predators. Next appeared the ship hound spotter, a beast that could sense cracks in a hull before they became visible. And then Lynn created the most terrifying thing for the Brainholts, the storm shepherd. It was a monster that controlled a herd of marine creatures the way a shepherd controlled sheep. It could bring deep-sea beasts under its control, redirecting them to the required location. In other words, Lynn had obtained not merely a pet, but combat logistics for the ocean. When Alvin learned that his family's shipyard was now renting Lynn's services, he turned whiter than paper. The marine line brought Lynn to the next stage of the system. One night, when a powerful storm raged over the ocean nursery, the system offered him not an ordinary seed, but a special opportunity for the first time. Legendary companion available, Hanyan. Partner selection is based not on strength, but on the heart. Lynn stared at the message. On the heart? He did not understand until an egg the size of a human head rose from the misty water. Its surface was covered with silver lines, and something inside it beat like a second heart. Celia, whom he had summoned specifically, fell silent. What is that? Lin carefully touched the egg, and the system displayed. Archetype companion. Form is not fixed. Hatching depends on the owner and emotional resonance. He smirked. So it will choose what it becomes by itself? Yes, said Era, who had arrived at the shipyard as a financial consultant and had already managed to compile a risk table. And if it turns out to be something legendary, your company will rise to an entirely new level. Lin looked at the egg and felt that it was not merely a beast. It was a partner. Lin decided not to force the hatching. He kept the egg beside him for several days, worked, slept, inspected the soil, argued with Era, observed the marine currents, and occasionally simply sat on the pier. And then something strange happened. The egg reacted to his mood. When he became angry, it darkened. When he worked, it brightened. When he laughed, golden lines appeared on its surface. When Celia was nearby, blue fire flickered inside it. It is bonding with its surroundings, she said. Or looking for an owner, Lin replied. And what if it does not like its owner? Then I probably simply do not deserve it. For the first time, Celia looked at him not as a businessman, but as a person. And soon, the egg cracked. Something resembling a small sea dragon crawled out from inside, but it had transparent wings as though made from a film of water. Its eyes were surprisingly intelligent, and there was a crescent-shaped mark on its forehead. The system named it Moon Dolphin Dragon. Lin and Celia fell silent at the same time. It is cute, Era whispered. And it will also be worth a fortune, she added dryly a second later. The Moon Dolphin Dragon chose Lin by itself. And then, even more strangely, it chose Celia as its secondary partner. This meant that the companion recognized not one owner, but a team. It changed the rules of the game. Now Lin could build not merely a farm, but linked groups of companion monsters for crews, caravans, and cities. House Brainholt realized that the situation was getting out of control when the Moon Dolphin Dragon was shown for the first time at a public demonstration in the port. The hybrid companion not only kept a ship perfectly stable during a storm, but also created a stable navigation field around it, making the vessel nearly invulnerable to monsters of the depths. It was the collapse of the old maritime economy. The Brainholts assembled a unit and attacked at night. Their plan was simple: destroy the shipyard, steal the monster cores, and prove that Lin was too small for the ocean market. But they underestimated one thing. Lin now knew how to grow territory. The entire shipyard was already a living domain. The tidal cataracts raised the alarm, the deep water needles attacked from the water, the reef dragonlings raised coral barriers, and the Storm Shepherd intercepted and redirected the marine beasts that the Brainholts had released from cages. Lin himself stood on the pier, surrounded by the Root Lion, the Harvest Monarch, and the Moon Dolphin Dragon. Alvin shouted from the deck, "You cannot control farms, a fleet, and a market at the same time." Lin merely looked at him, then looked more closely, and he raised his hand. A new line rose from the water of the ocean garden. They were living coral platforms connected to one another by roots, spikes, and magical filters. They began enveloping the shipyard, the pier, and the ships, creating their own oceanic biome. Alvin understood that he had lost even before the battle ended. After defeating the Brainholts, Lin did something he had never even considered before. He did not merely strengthen the shipyard, he began growing ships. At first it sounded insane, but the idea proved brilliant. If monsters could be grown, then marine transport forms that did not require conventional repairs and could restore their own hulls could also be grown. That was how the first series appeared: living corvettes, coral ships, storm barges, and the experimental Ray Galleon line. Celia stared at the design for a long time without speaking. "This is no longer trade," she finally said. "You are building a fleet that grows itself." "Yes," Lin replied. "If the world wants war, I will grow faster than it can declare one." Ira stood nearby, already calculating the cost of the new transportation revolution. "You are currently destroying every shipyard on the continent," she said, "and creating new ones. Terrible. Profitable." She smirked. "That is why I like you as a problem. While the Marine line was expanding rapidly, Lin remembered another niche, the underground one. Where there was no light but there was pressure, minerals, and rare fauna, completely different species could be grown. Fungal monsters, stone larvae, ore beasts, purifier parasites, and creatures capable of sensing magical veins. He descended into an old mine abandoned because of a collapse and planted special seeds in the ground. The system reacted immediately. Underground biome unlocked. Root and ore forms available. From the rock grew stone mole rats that sensed cracks, fungal guardians that purified the air, ore foxes that located precious metals, cave echo hounds that functioned as acoustic scouts, and a new type, the steel cocoon, from which combat hybrids later emerged. This line proved gold-bearing in the literal sense. Mining guilds formed a queue. Aristocrats wanted rare minerals. The crown became interested in clearing old dungeons. And Lin understood that his economy had ceased to be linear. It had become vertical. Literally, the sea, the earth, the surface, the air, everything could be transformed into a living farm. But as soon as Lin became too powerful, a new player entered the game. At the World Bio-Artifact Exhibition, a man named Danter Vale appeared, the heir of a house of breeders that had spent many years working on the artificial cultivation of combat forms. Unlike Lin, he despised randomness. He constructed perfect monsters through blood, stitches, and alchemy. Danter immediately declared, "Farmers grow food, breeders create power. Everything else is an illusion." The hall laughed. Lin did not, because Danter had brought monsters that were terrifying not because of their size but because of their quality. Rapid recovery, perfect reflexes, precisely calibrated aggression, and the absence of unnecessary weaknesses. They were not living domains, but weapons. This was a genuine competitor. And now the entire world awaited the first public confrontation between the two schools. Lin's natural cultivation, Danter's artificial breeding. The battle took place in the bio-exhibition arena before thousands of spectators and dozens of representatives of kingdoms. Danter brought out his finest creation, the Blue Executioner, a monster with a perfect muscular structure and a combat core strengthened through alchemy. Lin responded with the Harvest Monarch. "You cannot be serious," Danter smirked. "I simply do not play your game," Lin said. The Blue Executioner was released forward. It moved with cold precision, destroying everything in its path. The Harvest Monarch met it with roots, buds, stone spikes, and steel vines. Danter blinked. Its structure is like that of a living forest. Exactly. Danter intensified the attacks. His beast functioned perfectly but soullessly. Lin, meanwhile, drew power from the environment, from the soil, and from the connection between forms. Every movement of the monarch was an adaptation, not a calculation. And that was precisely the difference. When the Blue Executioner broke through the first layer of root armor, Lin calmly activated a new phase. The motherbed rose from beneath the ground, and with it came enhanced versions of all nearby lines. The chamber gasped. The Harvest Monarch did not merely win. It multiplied the battlefield. Danter did not understand that his defeat was predetermined by Lin's very nature. Artificial breeding was powerful when conditions were stable, but if the field changed, if new threats appeared, if urgent adaptation was required, a living biome always won. The Harvest Monarch drew new power from the ground. The Reef Dragonling adapted to the arena and created a damp zone. The Parasitic Garden neutralized foreign alchemy. The Root Lion blocked breakthroughs. The Moon Dolphin Dragon cut off energy waves. Danter retreated with every passing minute. "Impossible! Your beast should not change so quickly." Lin looked at him calmly. "They should not. They are simply alive." In the end, the Blue Executioner fell, and for the first time the public saw not merely another monster supplier, but a man who transformed nature into a weapon of the market and war simultaneously. After defeating Danter, Lin received offers from every side. The crown wanted to integrate him into the state system. The Maritime Chamber wanted to make him a permanent contractor. The mining guilds wanted to grant him exclusive rights. The old houses wanted to buy shares. The competitors wanted to negotiate. But Lin rejected all of it, because his goal had long since outgrown business. He wanted to build a living empire of domains where every biome provided its own power. The forest beasts, the sea navigation and protection, the underground ore and hidden forms, the wasteland's restoration, the city's stabilization and nourishment, the mountain's dragon lines, and the rift's legendary companions. And it was then that the system showed him a new line. Upper layer available, Imperial Garden. Lin stared at the message for a long time, and then for the first time in the entire history of his farm, he did not smile, but simply said quietly, "So there is still room to grow." When Lin read the line, Imperial Garden, he immediately understood that it was not merely a new farm level. It was a threshold beyond which his system ceased to be a craft and became a state. That very night, a strange radiance flared above his main greenhouse. The soil beneath all the nurseries warmed simultaneously, as though an enormous organism had awakened inside the earth. The roots stirred, the seawater in the pools began to boil, the stone layers in the mines trembled, and glowing lines resembling the pathways of a circulatory system lit up across the distant fields. Lin stood at the center of it all and, for the first time in his life, felt not merely growth, but integration. The system opened a map for him that had never existed before. Imperial Garden, 0/3 heart domains bound. Transition to the upper layer is impossible without territorial recognition. First form available, living region. Lin slowly exhaled. So now I need to grow more than beasts, he told himself. Now I need to grow lands. Ira, standing nearby with a calculation tablet, looked at him with the expression that usually appeared on people who understood that what stood before them was not a business but the future. "You have just transformed economics into geomagic," she said. "Yeah. And you're not even afraid?" Lin looked at the fields, at the sea, at the mines, at the greenhouses, at the beasts that lived between them like connective tissue. "I am afraid," he answered honestly. "But now I have already gone too far to stop." A heart domain turned out to be neither a building nor an altar. It was a place where the territory recognized you as its master. For the first domain, Lin chose neither the farm nor the port. He chose the Greystone Wasteland. Once, this land had been dead. Then he began restoring it. Now grasses already grew there, purification zones had been established, and his first restoration beast roamed the area. But to transform the territory into a heart domain, merely improving the land was not enough. He had to make the territory itself accept his authority. Lin arrived there not with an army or monsters, but with three things: a seed of the mother bed, the harvest monarch, and the moon dolphin dragon, which sensed the emotional rhythm of the environment better than any mage. When he stood in the center of the restored circle, the sky above the wasteland darkened. The wind fell silent. All the beasts around him, even the wild ones, froze and turned their heads toward him. The system displayed recognition trial begun. Ghostly images of the former wasteland rose from the cracks in the ground, the dead crust, old bones, and shadows of exhaustion. It was the memory of what the land had once been. For the domain to accept him, Lin had to endure not a battle but the judgment of the territory. He did not attack. He planted a seed. A thin root grew from it, then a second, then an entire wreath of root veins that absorbed the dust of the past. The harvest monarch lowered itself beside him and began filling the earth with nourishing power. The moon dolphin dragon rose into the air, releasing gentle waves of light that traveled across the ground like breathing. And then the most important thing happened. The wasteland did not merely come alive. It recognized Lin. The symbol of the heart domain flared beneath his feet. The sand transformed into fertile soil. Thin stems sprouted in places where nothing had ever grown before. And the system announced, "First heart domain bound." The Greystone Wasteland has become the living field of rebirth. Lin looked at the greenery breaking through the dead stone and felt that this was only the beginning. After the first domain was bound, his system reorganized itself. Now Lin could do more than manage individual farms. He could connect them into a shared network where every biome strengthened the others. The marine shipyard strengthened navigation forms. The underground mines provided minerals for the soil. The wasteland supplied restoration resources. The central farm remained the core, while the motherbed was the source of new lines. Era created a diagram and stared at it for a long time before saying, "This is no longer a business. It is a vertical empire of living assets." "Nicely said," Lin replied. "I am not giving you a compliment. I am warning you. If the kingdoms see this, they will begin putting pressure on you from every direction." Lin nodded. "They have already begun." In response to the binding of the domain, the market reacted instantly. The price of his monsters increased. Rumors of the living region spread across the continent. People appeared who wanted to buy the right to participate in his biosystem. The guilds wanted licenses. The crown wanted military control. The maritime chamber wanted an exclusive fleet. The miners wanted underground beast constructions. The aristocrats wanted personal companions. But Lin had already learned the most important rule. If you become too valuable, they either buy you or break you. He had no intention of allowing either. The chorus of the third heaven had not disappeared. It had simply retreated to gather its strength. And now, when Lin had bound the first heart domain, they decided to strike where his system was still vulnerable at the center of the root network. Their unit came at night. These were not ordinary fanatics. They were professionals, demolition mages, those who broke magical nodes, people with anti-connection maps, domain hunters, and one unknown figure in a black cloak whose presence immediately alarmed the beasts. Celia, who had arrived in the wasteland for negotiations, was the first to notice the threat. "We have guests," she said. Lin rose from his chair and walked outside without haste. The chorus stood at the boundary of the domain, unaware that they were already inside the system. "Lin Morrow," their leader said, "your expansion is disrupting the balance. You are creating a territorial anomaly." Lin looked at him and his unit. "You came for balance?" he asked, wearing masks and carrying demolition seals. The leader of the chorus took out a black relic. "We came to finish the mistake." Lin silently raised his hand. Roots rose from the ground. Protective beasts emerged from the water. Lunar mist descended from the sky. Stone mole rats came from the mines. And the harvest monarch rose from the center of the domain. The chorus had underestimated the domain. They thought they had come to a farm, but they had come into an organism, and now every step they took activated a new reaction. The real battle began when the unknown figure in the black cloak attempted to sever the root node of the wasteland. He was a specialist in domains severing a very rare and dangerous form of magic. His blade did not cut flesh but broke the connection between a territory and the one who held it. Lin felt the lines tremble throughout the wasteland, and then the system showed him a new possibility. Domain roots activated. Heart domain defense available. Lin did not have time to think. The motherbed reacted on its own. The archdomain guardian rose from the depths of the earth, an enormous living construction of vines, scales, and stone. Its body looked like a mixture of a tree, a dragon, and an ancient tower. The guardian stood between the cloaked figure and the root node. The black mage struck. The blade cut through the air, but the guardian absorbed the blow, and a new layer of armor immediately grew over its body. For the first time, Lin saw how his heart reacted to a threat against the territory. And he understood that the heart domain was not a metaphor. It was literally the heart of his empire. Celia, covering the flank with marine monsters, shouted, "If you do not pull him out now, they will tear the node apart." Lin nodded. Then he did something he had never done before. He ordered the beasts not to attack the enemy but to seal the space. Root hounds, storm rays, stone mole rats, and reef filters began building a ring around the node. The density of the domain increased. The chorus began losing its mobility. The black-cloaked figure accelerated irritably, trying to break through. And then Lin activated a new form. Imperial Bed. It was neither a creature nor a spell. It was a mode in which the entire territory of the domain transformed into a single living organism with a single will. The soil moved, the roots intertwined. The rocks rose like protective plates. The moisture became a misty net, the air filled with pollen and mana. The chorus suddenly realized that they were not being killed, they were being digested. Lin stood in the center of the field and spoke very calmly. "You came to break my root, but you failed to notice that you have been standing on my body for a long time." It was a terrifying moment even for him, because now he felt the entire wasteland as an extension of himself. Every crack, every blade of grass, every beast. The Black Mage finally understood whom he was dealing with and hurled a domain-severing seal at Lin. But the Harvest Monarch took the blow upon itself. The Archdomain Guardian deployed a field, and the Moon Dolphin Dragon synchronized all the allies into a single feeling for 1 second. And that was enough. The circle of the chorus was broken. The leader of the unit retreated, leaving behind only a warning. "You do not understand what you are doing. When the upper layer opens, you will not be able to contain what has grown." Lin watched him leave and slowly said, "Then I will grow even faster." After the battle, the mother bed trembled and opened another system window for Lin. Condition fulfilled. Upper layer of the Imperial Garden unlocked. Available primary legendary seed. Era nearly dropped her tablet when she saw the inscription. "Do you understand what this means?" Lin remained silent. "It means that now you can grow more than merely rare monsters," she continued. "But creatures of the level of world symbols. Progenitors. Those that are usually not grown, they are feared, argued about, and legends are built around them." Lin slowly reached toward the new seed. It was tiny, almost transparent, with a golden core and threads resembling a stellar root. The system explained, "Primary legendary seed. Nature unknown. Form will be chosen by the environment and the owner's will. Probability of obtaining a prime symbol class companion. Extremely rare." Lin felt a strange excitement. It was not merely a new weapon, not merely a resource. It was something that could become a legend of the world beside him. He planted the seed in the center of the Imperial bed, and the sky above the wasteland changed. At first, nothing happened. Then the wind fell silent. Then the sounds of insects disappeared. Then the sea in the distant docks stopped its waves. Then the dragons in the underground depths stopped moving. The world seemed to be waiting. Lin stood over the seed, and a strange heaviness suddenly appeared in his chest. Not fear, but the feeling that he stood before something ancient and choosing. The seed reacted not to mana, but to personality. Era took a step back. "It is evaluating you." Lin did not take his eyes off the soil. "Let it evaluate me." The soil slowly cracked. The first petal rose from within, not a flower, not a bone, not a crystal, but something between them. Then the second. The third. And finally, a small and shapeless creature rose from the center, as though it had not yet decided what it wanted to be. It looked at Lin, then at the world, then at Lin again. The system remained silent for too long, and then it displayed, "Prime symbol formed. No name assigned. Form is governed not by power, but by choice." The creature slowly floated toward Lin, touched his palm, and fell asleep. Lin blinked. "Is that all?" Era snorted. "It seems it decided that you impressed it enough." Celia, leaning against the railing, quietly smirked. "If that is a legendary companion, then it has a very strange personality." Lin looked at the tiny creature in his palm and understood that sometimes the strongest creation neither roars nor demands worship. It simply chooses those capable of raising it. The creature grew before their eyes, but not quickly, as though it were absorbing the world itself. It changed form depending on who was nearby. Near Celia, it glowed blue. Near Era, golden. Near the Harvest Monarch, green. When the Root Lion appeared nearby, it spread its wings for the first time. And then Lin understood what it would become. He looked at it and quietly said, "You will not be a weapon. You will be a connection." The creature shuddered. The system responded, "Name accepted. Legendary companion, Heartroot." Lin smiled. The name was neither loud nor threatening. but it perfectly described what his empire was becoming. Not a sword, not a shield, a root from which everything else grows. The heart root rose into the air and touched every domain through the network. The marine shipyard, the underground mines, the Greystone wasteland, the main farm, everything glowed with a single rhythm for a moment. For the first time, the system showed the complete map of his empire. And it was no longer a farm. It was a living continental node. Naturally, something like that could not be hidden. Several days later, three forces announced their actions at once. House Brainholt wanted maritime control. Verde's crown wanted to reclaim the market. The chorus of the third heaven wanted to tear out the source. Each side believed that it would strike separately, but Lin already knew that they would try. That was precisely why he gathered all his allies in the central tower of the Imperial Garden. Ira stood beside a board on which the enemy's routes had been drawn. Celia read the navigation forecasts. Toran checked the underground resources. Former farmers, hunters, miners, and workers stood beside the monsters Lin had grown for them. They will attack in 3 directions, Era said. The seas, the trading nodes, and the route. Lin nodded. Let them come. Celia looked at him in surprise. Are you sure? Lin slowly raised his gaze. Yes, because this time they will not attack a farm. They will attack a system that I have already taught to fight. The battle began at dawn. The Brainholts raised their fleet and entered the marine sector, confident that they could destroy the shipyard. Verde's crown struck the trading caravans and markets. The chorus appeared at the edge of the wasteland with ritual structures prepared to break the domain. But none of these were separate points anymore. They were one organism. The marine sector repelled the attack with coral ships and storm shepherds. The underground sector released stone mole rats, destroyers, and ore foxes that captured saboteurs underground. The trading nodes closed themselves behind living barriers and guardian pets. And the Imperial bed at the center became the true heart of the defense. Lin moved through the network as though through his own body. If the enemy struck the sea, he strengthened the roots. If they struck the root, he raised layers of stone. If they struck trade, he launched the mobilization of pets. If they struck logistics, he transferred resources through living channels. The battle did not look like a single scene. It looked like a series of disasters, each of which was a response to the previous one. And that was precisely what made it terrifying. During the battle, Lin finally saw Alvin Brainholt again. He stood on the deck of a shattered flagship, wet, furious, and no longer as confident as before. All this time, you were not building a company, he shouted. Lin stood on the shore amid roots and light. And all this time, you thought companies could not fight. You will destroy the economy. No, Lin replied. I am merely showing that it stopped belonging to you long ago. Alvin fell silent, because it was true. Verde's crown, the Brainholts, and the other houses relied on the old monopoly. And Lin showed the world that living systems could be cheaper, more efficient, and stronger. The old houses were losing not because he was stronger than each of them individually, but because he had ceased to be a single point of attack. When the last wave of enemies retreated, the Imperial Garden finally completed its awakening. The earth became deeper and richer, the water cleaner and more alive, the air more saturated with mana, the monsters more intelligent, the domains more strongly connected, the companions stronger. And the heart root, sitting on Lin's arm, suddenly raised its head and looked into the sky. The system flashed with one final message. Imperial Garden ready for expansion. Next step, creation of the central legendary biome. Objective, a region recognized by the world as a living capital. Lin stood in the middle of his land and felt everything around him finally align into a single whole. Business, farm, empire, network of domains, allies, monsters, companions, living ships, underground lines, ocean, wasteland, garden. And he understood that simply growing one more monster was no longer enough for him. Now he had to grow the capital of a new world. At night, when everything had fallen silent, Lin climbed the tower of the Imperial Garden and looked down. The marine docks glowed beneath him. Farther away, the fields shimmered. Even farther away, underground crystals burned. Beyond them, the restored lands of the wasteland shone. Water, soil, stone, roots, wind, everything functioned as a single system. Ira stood beside him and silently looked at the landscape. "Do you understand that this can no longer be stopped?" she asked. Lin nodded, and it should not be. Celia smiled, leaning against the railing. "Then who are you now?" Lin remained silent for some time, and then he answered very calmly, "I am a farmer." Era and Celia looked at him simultaneously. He smiled. "It is just that now I grow more than monsters. I grow territories, markets, and eras." The heart root flew above the tower, while below, the enormous empire of living domains shimmered like a map of the future. And somewhere far away beyond the borders of his lands, those who wanted to steal that future were already beginning to gather. When the Imperial Garden grew stronger, Lin finally received a map from the heart root. On it, beyond the known seas, a region appeared that was absent from every state atlas, the Nameless Reef. It was not merely a place, but an ancient rift, where ocean, stone, and mana intertwined so tightly that, according to rumors, the first primordial beast forms were born there. Sea captains avoided it, and old maps marked it only with the symbol of emptiness. Celia immediately became serious when she saw the mark. "If this zone truly exists, there may be a source there," she said. "Not a local one, not a regional one, a primary one." Ira, who had already become a full strategic partner, quickly scrolled through the market reports. If the source is primary, that means monstrous demand, and a monstrous war if someone finds it first. Lin looked at the map without fear, but with the rare tension that appeared in him only before something truly enormous. "Then we will find it first." The heart root slowly pressed itself against his palm, and the system displayed a new notification. "Path to the Nameless Reef unlocked. Transition to the primal source zone available. Probability of encountering a legendary progenitor-level monster extremely high." Celia exhaled. "Excellent. So we are going somewhere where everything will try to kill us." Lin smirked. "Sounds like an ordinary business trip." The journey to the Nameless Reef took 3 days. The farther they traveled, the stranger the water became. At first, it began glowing at night. Then silhouettes of fish that no one could identify began appearing within it. Then the compasses started spinning for no reason. And then the air above the ocean itself began to feel as though it contained memories. Celia, standing at the helm of the living corvette, quietly said, "This is not merely a reef. This is an old ocean." Lin turned toward her. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the sea here used to be different. Before maps, before ports, before cities, perhaps even before the current age of grimoires." It was the first time she had spoken so cautiously. Celia was usually direct, confident, and sharp, but now even she felt the pressure of the place. When they entered the boundaries of the reef, everything around them changed. The water became deeper even though the depth did not change. The light dimmed. The marine beast in his system fell silent. The moon dolphin dragon curled up on the deck as though it sensed someone's presence. Even the harvest monarch, which remained connected through the domain network, began transmitting anxious impulses. Era opened the defensive diagrams. "There is an ancient hostile zone here, but it is not aggressive. It is more evaluating." Lin gripped the railing. "It seems we have come somewhere where we will truly be measured." At the center of the Nameless Reef stood an enormous structure resembling a coral mountain, but too precise, too symmetrical to be natural. It rose from the water like a sleeping palace. Dozens of strange marine beasts swam around it, not aggressive but wary. Lin's system identified them as forms of progenitor resonance. Heart Reef detected. Potential primal source domain. Contact with the core possible only upon recognition. Lin and Celia disembarked onto the outer platform. The root, marine, and dragon beasts remained ready. Era maintained contact with the ship. Toran monitored the underground channels that began beneath the reef. And all of it felt like preparation, not for a battle, but for a meeting with something that could decide whether they were even worthy of standing there. When Lin approached the heart of the reef, the coral surface slowly opened. A creature emerged from within that made even Celia's breath catch. It was enormous, but not hostile. Its body resembled a sea dragon fused with a reef crown. Its wings were made of water and stone, its eyes of glowing pearlescent dust. Coral branches grew along its back, and an ancient symbol resembling a heart symbol shimmered in its chest. The system froze for a second. Then it displayed only one thing: primordial monster found. Lin slowly exhaled. Are you the one who chooses an owner by the heart? The creature looked at him for several long seconds, and then the surface of the sea around their platform became still. The primordial monster did not attack. It simply created a trial space around them. The water rose in walls, the reef lit up, and images of other eras appeared around Lin and Celia. Seas without ports, ships made of bone and wind, ancient hunters of deep-sea beasts, people who did not yet know how to subdue the ocean and were only learning how not to die in its embrace. Lin understood. This was not a visualization. It was the memory of the place. The creature was testing not strength, but attitude. The first thing to appear in the trial was a monster resembling a shadow with a maw capable of tearing apart a tide. It lunged at them without warning. Lin released his combat marine beast, but noticed that the reef itself strengthened the enemy while it acted out of fear and pressure. The creature seemed to be saying, "If you want to rule the sea, stop thinking of it as prey." Lin froze. Then he removed the aggression and changed his approach. Instead of attacking, he ordered the beast not to destroy the threat, but to harmonize the flow. The tidal catarsis began guiding the water. The moon dolphin dragon balanced the resonance. The reef dragonlings created protective barriers, preventing fear from spreading. Celia, understanding the idea, adjusted the ship lines to the new rhythm, and suddenly the creature changed form. Its reef armor opened, its marine branches spread out, and its eyes flared with a soft golden light. Recognition partial. Lin did not understand. Then the system explained. The primordial monster has accepted the path, but requires final proof. Celia looked at him. What does that mean? The creature slowly raised its head toward the sky, and ancient marine runes began pulsing around them. Recognition required not strength, but a sacrifice. A small but honest one. Lin understood immediately. He removed his glove and placed his palm against the reef surface, and he allowed part of his own mana to flow into the heart of the place. The world around them trembled. A thin thread of light emerged from Lin's palm, and the coral mountain began reacting as though it had finally received the missing element. The primordial monster lowered its head and became still, and then an enormous system window flared around it. Legendary primordial monster accepted. No name assigned. Form will become available after a cultivation season. Celia blinked in confusion. A cultivation season? The system revealed the meaning. This was not an ordinary binding. The primordial monster did not immediately become a pet. It went through its own growth cycle within Lin's domain like the rarest seed. Its power could not simply be taken. It had to be grown together with it. It was insane and perfect. Lin understood that this form would not merely strengthen his army. It would teach him another level, not to subjugate primordial forms, but to accompany their development. So it will grow together with us, he said quietly. Celia looked at the reef and, for the first time, smiled as though she herself were witnessing the birth of a new era. Then you have gained an ally that no house can buy. Era, watching the broadcast from the ship, added dryly, and an asset that cannot be valued by an ordinary exchange. Wonderful. You are breaking the market again. Lin laughed, but the joy did not last long. As soon as the nameless reef recognized Lin, the ancient rift beneath the sea sent a signal in every direction. It was felt not only by his beasts, it was felt by those who hunted primal sources. The people of the chorus of the third heaven arrived first. They appeared along the waterline in anti-ritual vessels with tattered black sails. Then the ships of the Brainholts appeared on the horizon. Behind them came unknown members of the old underwater orders. And finally, magical platforms belonging to Verde's crown descended from the air, which for some reason also did not want to remain uninvolved. Lin stood on the coral platform and watched all of this without much panic. Celia tightened her grip on the hilt of her saber. They came for the core. Era, already making calculations, quickly said, "If they unite, there will be too many of them for an ordinary defense." Lin looked at the reef. The primordial monster had not yet fully formed but was already reacting to the threat, and new marine runes were flaring around it. It could not enter battle at full strength. Not now. This was its growth season. But Lin did not want to surrender the place that had only just recognized him. He raised his hand. "Then we will use everything we have." And the largest scale defense the ocean had ever seen began. The living corvettes moved out first. Their hulls grew directly on the water, becoming covered with coral plates. The storm barges protected the flanks. The ray galleons rose from the depths like underwater fortresses. Lin's marine beasts divided into 3 groups. One struck across the water, another in the depths, and the third in the sky. Celia led the maritime maneuver as though she had been born inside this system. She did not merely command the ships, she felt how the living fleet changed direction and selected the optimal trajectories. The chorus attempted to perform a severing ritual, but the bubble rays purified the water of foreign mana. The Brainholts released deep-sea beasts. They were met by deep water needles and sea serpents. Verde's crown lowered flying platforms equipped with fire rods. They were met by storm fields and coral shields. Lin did not run around the battlefield. He stood at the center of the reef platform and issued commands like the director of an enormous living system. The Harvest Monarch sensed the earth. The Heart Root sensed the stability of the domains. The Moon Dolphin Dragon sensed the harmony of the flows. The Primordial Monster sensed the rhythm of the growing season. And all of it joined together into a single defense. For the first time, the chorus saw that its usual method did not work. The enemy did not break, it adapted. And not as an individual force, but as an entire structure. The key turning point came when Lin realized to win, he had to do more than defend himself. He had to expand the field right now. He looked at the nameless reef, then at the sea around it, then at the enemy ships, and for the first time, he used a new command. "Ocean Garden," he said. The system trembled. Light passed across the water, and the impossible began before everyone's eyes. Corals began growing toward the enemy. Living shields rose from the depths and marine plants clung to the hulls of enemy vessels, slowing them down and drawing mana back into the water. The water was no longer merely an environment. It became Lin's territory. The ships of the chorus began losing formation. The Brainholt's barriers began collapsing. The Verde's crown platforms began losing energy. Everything around them was turning into a living map, where every foreign maneuver only strengthened the owner of the reef. Celia almost laughed when she saw it. "You just turned the sea into your greenhouse sector." "Something like that." "You are impossible." "Thank you, that was not a compliment." "I know, but the enemy still found a weak point. They attempted to break through to the heart of the reef to destroy the primordial monster before the growing season was complete." The black-cloaked figure from the chorus was heading there, the same specialist in domain severing whom Lin had seen before. He broke through farther than the others and reached the coral mountain, where the heart primordial monster slept. Lin saw it at the same moment. No! He lunged forward, but the Severer had already prepared his strike. If he hit the core now, the primordial monster could die or collapse into a deformed form. But at that moment, the reef itself reacted. The memory of the place fully awakened. The water around the Severer became heavy like glass. Coral branches wrapped around his arms. Marine runes flared with ancient light. And the Moon Dolphin Dragon, as though answering a call, created a field of perfect harmony. The Severer froze. And Lin saw before him not merely an enemy, but the final trial of the primal source. He stopped within striking distance and said, "Do you want to understand whether I am worthy of this place?" The primordial monster slowly opened its eyes, and in response to these words, a golden pillar of light rose from its chest. The system announced, "Growing season complete. Primordial monster has completed the first stage. A name may be assigned." Lin understood that this was the moment of truth. He looked at the creature, at the sea, at the reef, at the ships, and at his growing world, and said, "Your name is Sea Heartcore." The name entered the system like the tolling of a bell. Legendary primordial monster, Sea Heartcore. The creature suddenly rose into the air, and the entire coral mountain behind it flared with light. Its body completed its first evolution. Now it was not merely a sea dragon, but a living primordial form capable of connecting the sea, the reef, and the domain into a single network. At that moment, something happened that no one had expected. The Sea Heartcore did not attack. It began to build. Coral veins rose from the water, creating outer barriers. The underwater current stabilized. Marine energy flowed into a living circuit. And the ocean around the nameless reef began restructuring itself as though the territory had finally received its true guardian. Lin felt that he was not receiving a weapon. He was receiving an anchor for the next era. And the enemies understood it too. The Chorus, the Brainholts, and Verdi's crown began retreating because the matter was no longer profitable. They had come for a source but found a place that could not be taken by force. When the reef took shape and the Sea Heartcore completed its first stage, Lin's entire network reacted simultaneously. The Greystone Wasteland bloomed more intensely. The Imperial Garden received an impulse of growth. The mine roots grew deeper. The Ocean Garden became stronger. The Heart Root flared with light. It was no longer a local effect. It was a continental response, because every recognized domain heart strengthened the others. Lin's system was ceasing to be a collection of farms and beginning to resemble a living civilization where every biome was connected to another. It was a new form of power, not through walls, not through an army, but through growth. Era watched all of it with the expression of someone who had long since stopped thinking of Lin as merely an entrepreneur. "Now I understand why the old houses were so frightened," she said. "You did not take the market away. You showed that the market could be grown." Lin smirked. "Yeah, and that frightens them more than any sword." "Perhaps." Celia, standing beside him on the reef, nodded toward the sea. "If this is the beginning, what comes next?" Lin looked toward the horizon where the last traces of the enemies were already disappearing. "Next, we will find the next domain." Returning home, Lin no longer felt like a simple farmer, even though he continued to call himself one. Now he had the Greystone Wasteland as the living field of rebirth, the Sea Heartcore in the nameless reef, the Imperial Garden as the core of the region, marine, underground, and surface networks, a fleet that grew, companions that chose their owner by the heart, and a primal system capable of transforming territory into a single organism. When he climbed the main tower and looked down at his lands from above, it seemed to him that he saw not merely enterprises but a map of a future country. The Heart Root sat beside him, swaying quietly like a sign of a new era. The Sea Heartcore connected with the ocean on the horizon. The Harvest Monarch maintained the balance of the fields. The Archdomain Guardian stood as the guardian of the core, and the Moon Dolphin Dragon flew somewhere between wind and water, as though checking the harmony of the entire system. Era stood beside him. "Do you understand that this is almost a capital already?" Lin did not answer immediately. Then he nodded. "Almost. And what is needed to make it a true capital?" He looked ahead. There, far away, were still ancient biomes, old primal sources and zones that even legends did not enter. 3 more hearts, he said. "And then the world itself will come here." Lin stood at the top of the Imperial Garden and looked at the map, where 2 marked points were already glowing: the Greystone Wasteland and the Nameless Reef. The third was still hidden behind the white mist of ancient lands, and the system remained silent about it, as though even it did not want to name the place aloud. "Only the final domain remains," Era said quietly, checking the flows. "If we bind it, the entire network will become stable." Celia, leaning against the railing beside him, looked toward the horizon. "Or the entire country will begin to consider you a threat." Lin smirked, but without amusement. That has already happened. And indeed, over the past month, such a density of rumors, contracts, fears, and ambitions had grown around his name that he could no longer be perceived as an ordinary farmer. Some called him a biomage, some a trade monarch, some the creator of living infrastructure. But he still saw himself as a man who had simply learned to grow powers, places, and destinies. Now all that remained was to prove it to the world one final time. The third point led to an ancient region that old maps called the Forest of First Roots. It was a place where, according to legend, the earth first learned to sustain life. Not a forest in the ordinary sense, but the primordial form of a biome from which all the other green zones of the continent later spread. The journey there took neither a day nor a week. The farther they went, the more the world seemed to resist them. At the boundary of the region, compasses stopped working. The beast in the domain network froze. The marine signals from the Sea Heart Core arrived with a delay. Even the heart root in Lin's hand sometimes became hot like a living stone. This place does not want visitors, Celia observed. No, Lin replied. It wants to understand whether we are a mistake. Era walked ahead, plotting a route through the old logistical nodes. If this is a primal biome, there will most likely be a guardian there. Or something that guards the guardian itself. Or both at once, Torin muttered. Lin did not argue. He felt that here his system would encounter not another enemy, but something older than markets, older than empires, and perhaps older than the very concept of a farm. The Forest of First Roots. When they entered the Forest of First Roots, everything changed. There was none of the familiar greenery here. The leaves looked like layers of glass. The trunks were intertwined with glowing veins, and the air smelled not of wood or grass, but of something deep like wet earth after an eternity of waiting. The roots went so deep underground that it seemed as though they supported not merely the forest, but the entire world above it. Lin's system registered a new status. Ancient biome detected. Recognition level, unknown. Probability of aggressive response, high. As they walked toward the center, Lin noticed that the local beasts were not attacking. They were watching. From behind the trunks, from the shadows, from the upper crowns. Not with hostility, with evaluation. As though the forest already knew that it was not a conqueror coming here, but a claimant. Guardian of the roots. The center of the forest turned out to be not a clearing, but an enormous root hall where the trunk of a single ancient tree rose like a tower and disappeared into the mist. Beneath it slept neither a beast nor a spirit, but an entire archetype. When Lin stepped onto the circle of intertwined roots, the earth beneath him began to hum. An ancient runic projection appeared in the air, and from it rose a colossal figure resembling a deer, a tree, and an ancient creator beast all at once. Its antlers were branches covered with seeds. Its chest was a living core of wood mana. Its paws were roots extending directly into the ground. The system did not identify it immediately. Then it displayed a single name. Guardian of the First Root. The creature did not attack. It watched. And then, in a voice resembling the rustling of hundreds of leaves, it said, "Who has come to take not power, but the right?" Lin did not look away. The one who is already growing what you protected. The guardian remained silent for a long time. Then it asked, "What do you understand by cultivation?" Lin answered honestly, "Not control, not subjugation. Growth that helps what is nearby to live." It was not a beautiful answer. It was his true answer, and the forest seemed to hear it. The guardian did not fight in the usual sense. It created a trial, a series of living situations in which Lin had to do more than win. He had to prove that his system did not destroy the foundation of nature. First, shadows of starving beasts burst from the roots. Then false domains grew around them, attempting to confuse the network. Then the forest itself began restructuring the soil, testing whether Lin could adapt without violence. It was perhaps the most difficult trial of his life, because here he could not simply release an army and overwhelm the problem. He could not summon the harvest monarch and seal the field. He could not give an order to the fleet or the mine beasts. Here, he had to prove that his empire knew not only how to expand, but also how not to break what was already alive. Lin acted differently than before. He did not pressure the forest, he began negotiating with it. The Harvest Monarch stabilized the nourishment. The Heartroot adjusted the rhythm of the domain. Celia helped maintain the flows of moisture. Toran released purifying microforms into the soil. The Heart Primordial Monster, arriving through the connection with its reef, sent harmonizing signals. And then Lin did something he had never done before. He asked the system not to create a new species, but to weave the existing lines into a single natural chain. And the forest reacted. When the final trial ended, the guardian of the first root lowered itself onto one knee. The roots around Lin glowed like veins of light. The earth trembled not with threat but with agreement. And then the system activated the window Lin had been waiting for since the very beginning of this journey. Third Heart Domain recognized. The Forest of First Roots has become the heart of living legacy. Transition to the Imperial Center available. Era, standing nearby, slowly closed her eyes. "That is it," she said quietly. "Now you do not have a network. Now you have continental vitality." Celia smiled with the corner of her lips. "And who will dare call you a farmer after this?" Lin looked at the forest, at the glowing roots, at the ancient guardian, and understood. The answer was simple. Now no one. Because together with the third heart, his imperial garden ceased to be merely a union of farms. It became a system in which every place was a living part of a shared organism. It was no longer an estate, a corporation, or even a kingdom. It was a new form of the world. After the recognition of the third heart, all of Lin's lines began resonating simultaneously. The Greystone Wasteland intensified its restoration. The Nameless Reef entered the growth phase of the Sea Heart Core. The Imperial Garden transformed into the central node. The underground farms became deeper and more stable. The Marine Shipyard launched the next generation fleet. The surface nurseries began producing hybrids with titular synchronization. The Heartroot and the Heart Primordial Monster connected through the new network. The guardian of the first root became the guardian of the living center. For a moment, Lin felt that if everything collapsed now, not only his business would collapse, the balance of territories, trade routes, and magical flows would collapse. That was why kings looked at him that way. That was why the guilds feared him. That was why ancient orders were already hunting him. Because he had proved the impossible. Monsters could be grown not as weapons, but as the foundation of civilization. When they returned to the Imperial Garden, an unusual silence hung over the region. Not an alarming one, an expectant one, as though the world itself had stopped before taking a step. Ira checked the reports, Celia sent marine signals, Toran drew up underground expansion plans, and Lin sat on the tower and looked down at his lands. From above, everything looked peaceful, but every node was stretched tight like a string. And it was then that the system, for the first time, displayed neither a new seed nor a new species. It displayed a warning. The outer boundary of the world has noticed the Imperial Garden. Activity of ancient forces is increasing. Probability of an approaching contact of an unknown class, high. Lin stared at the lines for a long time. Then he closed his eyes and smirked. So they have come after all. Celia raised her gaze. Who? Lin looked toward the distant horizon where barely visible shadows were already gathering beyond the edge of the map. Those who will decide that a system like this cannot be left without supervision. Era looked up from her papers. That sounds like the end of peace. Lin answered without hesitation. No, it sounds like the beginning of the next season. At night, when the Imperial Garden sank into a soft glow, Lin walked out onto the highest tower. His domains shimmered below. The sea, the mines, the wasteland, the fields, the reef, the forest. The wind passed through the root arches, and it seemed as though the entire region breathed together with him. His allies stood silently nearby. The Heartroot glowed in his palm. The sea hartcore slept somewhere far away in the ocean. The harvest monarch sustained the fields. The guardian of the first root stood at the heart of the forest. The heart primordial monster prepared for a new stage of growth. Lin looked toward the horizon and suddenly understood that he no longer felt like a man who grew monsters. He felt like someone who grew the future. And somewhere there, beyond the mist, someone had already responded to his growth. A new shadow slid across the map of the world. The old borders began to change. And something enormous, ancient, and still unnamed slowly opened its eyes. Lin merely smiled. Because the story had not ended. It had only reached the moment when the world first noticed that the farm had become an empire.